Hey, so I'm talking to Peter Boghossian. He is a professor of philosophy at Portland State University. He's written a book called How to Have Impossible Conversations, a very practical guide. He's also written a book, A Guide to Creating Atheists, which I've never read, but we were talking a little bit before I actually began recording, and Peter just said jump into it. so we're recording kind of on the fly here. I haven't really introduced myself, but I'll just introduce myself to you, Peter. I am sort of a pro-religion atheist. Like a big portion of my fan base is Jordan Peterson fans. So while I'm an atheist, I've been super influenced by Jonathan Haidt, and I can see the value in exactly.
He's terrific. He's the righteous mind, and it's the coddling and
amazing books. Yeah,
and Peterson has been very, very good to me. I have nothing but good things to say about he's been incredibly supportive of me, and I wish him nothing but a speedy recovery.
Yeah. Yes. So I went through a bunch of questions, and I had told you before, in the vein of how to have impossible conversations, I didn't want to throw any gotcha questions at you. But
that's okay. You can throw anything at me you want. I've heard look, it's fine. I'm 53. I can handle it. If you're going to start calling me a Nazi, then that's a little different. But if you have a sincere question, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to answer it.
People would be more likely to call us both Nazis. Probably me a Nazi just for having this conversation with you.
Right, so
with
me.
I think we're both on the same side of that particular argument.
Okay, good. Well, I got Nazi, murderer, rapist. I mean, you name it, I've gotten it. So, but those are just invectives and smear tactics and a way to excuse oneself from intellectual work.
Totally.
And they're a way to virtue signal too.
See, one of the things that I wonder, and maybe we'll just jump right into it, because I'm wondering if this social justice stuff has become a replacement for religion, and if we weren't better off just with Christianity. I think that maybe 3 or 4 years ago, you might have had a different opinion on that than you do today. So go ahead, give us your take.
Well, it's it's just an epic question. So we talked about this on the Rubin Report, Jim and I, James Lindsay, the co-author of How to Have Impossible Conversations, and the grievance studies, my partner in that. It's called the substitution hypothesis, and the idea is that we want to substitute a belief. So everybody has a baseline, believing weird things, or however you want to say, preposterous beliefs. We all have a penchant for the supernatural, or penchant for religious broadly, not Abrahamic beliefs, but broadly religious beliefs. And Clay Rutledge has written about this rather extensively, as beliefs, as the Abrahamic traditions have fallen, beliefs in supernatural astrology and stuff have gone up. And so it's a substitution hypothesis with the brain as a CPU, and then the content just filling that. So that's one thing. We can talk about that. We can linger on that, or we can go to the next point.
Well, let me ask just a clarification question, because are you saying that you could get rid of Christianity and that social justice or some other type of ideology wouldn't fill the vacuum?
Oh, it would fill the vacuum.
Okay.
And that's the speculation for, of course it's multifactorial, but that's one of the reasons for the rise of social justice, which is not only completely insane, but demonstrably false in many cases. So one way to think about it, and I'm not saying I agree or disagree, I'm just saying it's a heuristic, is the substitution hypothesis. Now, to answer your question directly, I wrote a piece, I think it was in the American Mind, called The Great Realignment, Culture War 2.0. And in that, I set out the fact that we do see an alignment now between, and I talked about this in Peter Lindbergh's podcast as well, we do see an alignment between, this is so weird, it's going to take a few minutes to get your mind around it, but it's between anti-social justice Christians and anti-social justice atheists. And they're aligned on things like the rules of engagement. Like we speak to each other civilly, we don't accuse each other of being Nazis and rapists and murderers, etc. So the rules of engagement, we engage each other verbally in specific ways. And then the correspondence theory of truth, that our access to truth isn't mediated by immutable characteristics like race, gender, trans status, sexual orientation, things of that nature. And then on the other side of the coin, you have social justice Christians and social justice atheists. Now those folks are more closely together because even while their values in metaphysics differ and metaphysical claims, supernatural claims differ, they are superseded in a sense and overwritten by the dominant moral orthodoxies. So to answer your question directly, and Shermer said this to me years ago, the people who are, Michael Shermer from the Skeptic Society, the people who are supposedly his friends are on his quote unquote side have been more vicious and more nasty to him. You know, maybe it's the narcissism of small differences, I don't know. But there's no question that the current social justice lunacy and intersectional mania, these folks are far more difficult to deal with, and many benign forms of Christianity we'd be much better off with those than what we have now with these people.
So have you changed your mind on that? Because you had probably a very different opinion like 5 years ago.
Have I changed my mind? No, I was very specific in my first book and in my articles to never criticize religion, and I don't think I've done that. I've taken a sledgehammer to faith. I've framed everything in terms of epistemology, particularly atheism and new atheism, and atheism as a conclusion that one arrives at as a result of an epistemology upon which one can rely. And then that's the whole street epistemology thing, which was the first book in the Manual for Creating Atheists and my app Atheos and other publications and such. It's the idea, apologize for the noise, it's a busy street. It's the idea that we want to take a word like epistemology, which is how you know what you know, and bring it from the academy to the street. And so for me, atheism was always about epistemology, and any other framework, I suppose I should define my terms, so let me define my terms real quick. So I define atheist as, I don't have sufficient evidence to warrant belief in God, but if I were given that evidence, I would believe. So I've thrown a lot at you. At your question, which threw a lot at me. We can unpack and disambiguate those terms and such, but that's the basic idea.
Okay. So I differentiate atheists from anti-theists because I myself am an atheist, but I'm a pro-religion atheist. So, and the way that I define anti-theists are people who believe the world would be a better place without religion. And
which religion?
Yeah, exactly. So if you want to go which religion, there are people that believe the world would be a better place without any religion. There are people that believe the world would be a better place without certain religions. Like I believe, and I've sort of bought into Jordan Peterson's philosophy that Christianity is a pro-social religion for Western capitalist nations. Like the ethics package that goes along with Christianity facilitates the kind of society that is pro-capitalism, pro-innovation, like gives us all the nice goodies, is pro-individual freedom, is
redemption narrative, dignity, the whole work.
Forgiveness,
right, exactly. So there is no forgiveness with privilege, which is the original sin of the social justice.
Exactly. A huge problem in that ethics package.
Yeah, so that to me, to bring it back to an earlier discussion point, means that you do buy into the substitution hypothesis. You'd have to.
Okay.
Right? Because if you didn't buy into the substitution hypothesis, then you would say that a superior ethical system could come around, maybe perhaps one without metaphysical claims, or that no superior process would become. I mean, that's Sam Harris's point, or one of them. And no society has ever become more. I can't remember exactly how he framed it.
I can't remember it either.
Yeah, societies are better off when they're citizens become more reasonable and more rational and not less so.
I don't know that I buy that hypothesis, though.
Oh, well, then I get to ask you another question. Do you believe in moral facts? Do you think there are moral facts that are rationally derivable?
Yeah, I am a moral objectivist, to the consternation of many of my fans.
No, I am as well. So then the question becomes, do you think that the edicts of Christianity, and you could define those, 10 commandments, or maybe Islam, I don't know, like the pillars of Buddhism. I mean, I guess religion has a broad semantic range under which many religions fall. I guess the question then becomes, if you believe the tenets of religion are rationally derivable, how do you adjudicate between a conflict between conflicting religions?
Well, this concept of metaphorical truth that Brett Weinstein has come up with, I think works very well with Jordan Peterson's concept of truth. And I think that they kind of touched on it a bit in the debate between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, where Brett articulated it very well. And one of the questions that I have here, I'm curious, like your position on metaphorical truth, something being believing something untrue could provide survival and reproductive advantages that are obviously what make people believe these untrue things.
Yeah, there's no question that that's true.
Right.
And there are examples from evolutionary biology that Brett has talked about. Brett's a good friend of mine. Just went walking with him last week, actually. There's something that he comes in very generously and gives a guest lecture to my class, and he was telling about evolutionary advantages to stories with tsunamis, and how people will believe the stories, and they have a narrative structure and an arc and profess to be about objective truths, but there is a kernel of truth. When you see certain things, you run because the gods are mad, and that got folks away from the tsunami. So there's no question that there are pragmatic elements to believing things that are false. A buddy of mine was telling me about, he's a psychiatrist. He was telling me about a study. I haven't read the study, but the basic idea was that they asked men to rate their self-attractiveness on scales from 1 to 10. And then they asked them how many times, what their sex life was like, the frequency, etc. And then they asked women to rate the attractiveness of the men. And what they found was the men who overestimated their own physical attractiveness tended to, if you'll excuse the vulgarity, tended to get laid a lot more. And so the idea that some forms of self-delusion are not only evolutionarily useful, but can be a lot of fun too.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you are basically a believer in metaphorical truth then.
Well, I don't like the framing, a believer in metaphorical truth. I think that people can believe things that are false, like an accidentally true belief as well. People can believe, and we have to define truth and knowledge and such. I always like Plato's definition in the Theaetetus as justified true belief as a good starting point. But I don't like the idea of believe it. I think that we can look and see that it has practical import. And once we realize that it has practical import, then we can have a conversation about that. So look, it's probably a good thing. Look, here's the question. Are we as a society better off if people harbor a deep-seated delusion that there's what did Christopher Hitchens call him, a celestial dictator governing our someone just saying hello to me. somebody, an omnipotent, an everything, omni-max, shall we say, being looking over us all, that if we fuck up or we do bad things that we're punished for eternity. Are we as a society better if people harbor that delusion? You can say no all you want until people don't harbor the delusion, and then a maniac kills your son or your brother,
exactly.
Your daughter, etc. And so, again, I think the conversation has to root itself in the substitution hypothesis. Unless you want to claim that the edicts of Christianity, as I was saying, are all rationally derivable. And I don't think you want to claim that.
I'm with you. I'm an atheist. I don't believe that any
Yeah.
of it is factually accurate in the scientific sense, but I do think that it's metaphorically accurate. And like you said, a lot of people, and like I said, I haven't read Guide to Creating Atheists. Like, one of my questions is, do we really want to create atheists? Like, if we know this thing
A
from
manual.
a manual
So
for creating atheists.
Yeah, it wouldn't be that to pick on your word. It wouldn't be that it's so much accurate, but that it's useful.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can have a belief that's not accurate, that's very useful, and a belief that's very accurate and not very useful at all.
Correct. Yes.
Right. So, I mean, there are multiple places we could go with this conversation right now. You know, we could talk about truth and why it's important, or if it's important to do that. And, you know, part of the idea is that if your ontology or your belief life, is even better way to put it, is populated by beliefs if you look at it as an architectonic structure of, beams at the bottom that are unshaky, then either your whole house is going to come tumbling down at some point, or if you have core beliefs that are false, you think you're acting in your own best interest in the flourishing of yourself and your community, but you're actually not. So it's an inaccurate roadmap.
There can be, and like I said, I've dived deep into this topic. Like, I've done videos on the original podcast. The original podcast.
We can do anything you want. It's your show, man. I'm just walking around. So
no, this is great. No, this is great. This is great. I'm like, Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson argued about this topic, I think, for 2 hours on a podcast in 2017. They did a second podcast, which I don't think was as good. And I mean, I went into that podcast with the same kind of perspective as you. Like, it seemed like Jordan Peterson was completely bonkers to me, because I'm swimming in that scientific perspective. So it's difficult for me to see that there are this hidden truth that's obviously not scientifically truth, but if scientifically true. But if you live your life believing that it's true, you will have better outcomes than if you know that it's true.
So I don't know. I would say hidden truth. There's beliefs that people hold that are extraordinarily useful in a number of different arenas, and the tenacity at which they hold their belief. Also, if it's held in disproportion to the evidence, like if they have seven on a scale from 1 to 10, that's in the How to Have Impossible Conversations, the importance of scales. If there's 7 on the scale of what evidence do you have, and they attune their confidence in their beliefs to anything above 7, then they have to do something to make up the difference between the evidence they have and the confidence that they're warranted in having in the belief.
Mm-hmm.
So, look, it's obviously true, and we just gave 2 examples, that people can believe things that are either, they can take narratives as true, which, we're storytelling creatures, and then that can be useful for them. But I wouldn't frame it in terms of like hidden truths, or I think people can and regularly do believe false things, and that has some benefit to them. And I also think I'm not even talking about religion, just in general, if large numbers of people believe, look, instead of a nightshade plant killing people, what if there was something else, like tomatoes had some poison in them, but they thought they were part of the nightshade plant. So they had accidentally true belief, and that if you ate the tomato, assuming this is a parallel world, if you ate this thing that was nightshade and died, they would think it was nightshade, but it really had arsenic or something else in it. So Clearly, it's possible to have false beliefs that yield outcomes for individuals and society. The question is, do we want to disrupt those beliefs with truth? There's some really good stuff about utilitarianism and deontology, and every moon cycle or what have you, this primitive society. People don't like to say primitive societies, but
it's okay. You're safe here.
Well, that's okay. Well, there you go. People are going to cut it, and it's like, there he is, a Nazi. So the And this is in Smart and Williams, For and Against Utilitarianism. It's a wonderful, wonderful little book. It's a quick read, but it's really the best book on the subject I've seen ever written. So that yields their society tremendous stability, even though it's not true. And if you go in and you say, look, this isn't true, you disrupt that with the truth, but then they start killing each other. Have you ever seen Babylon 5?
Yeah. The show?
Yeah. It's like when Sinclair said no Minbari has ever killed another Minbari until Zalvalin, right? So that truth that's embodied in that, you can apply that to this concept.
Well, we can think of many examples where believing untrue things led to bad outcomes. I completely agree with you there. But just from an evolutionary perspective, I look at these religions as like ethics packages that have evolved over time. And the ones where the outcomes were, 51% good and 49% bad, evolution would seize on those to continue to develop them.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that we should advocate believing them or not attempt to repudiate beliefs that are, particularly moral beliefs that are not rationally derivable.
Mm-hmm.
We have every obligation to do that. But again, it comes back to the substitution hypothesis. If your fear is that once those beliefs have been discredited and abandoned, people are going to believe some other crazy thing, particularly if it's a vile moral proposition, then I first of all, I don't see what evidence you could provide for that. Because you don't know you don't know what's going to substitute for the God beliefs once they've fallen.
Right.
And so I do think that intersectionality and social justice will fall because they have no 1 Peter 3:15. They have no apologetic. That's why there can never be a great defender of social justice and intersectionality, because you have to know the other side of the issue, and it's simply baked into the worldview that they don't learn about the other side of the issue. So I don't think that that's sustainable. That said, there's no possible way anybody would know what will come in its place once it falls. And that's the other crazy thing about this to me. It's like anybody who spent even literally an hour studying intellectual history will realize that different cultures and different times have valued different things. And so we have a kind of cultural and moral myopia, thinking that the things that our culture currently values are the things that should be valued. Hey, can I tell you a story?
Yeah, go ahead. I have like 12 questions here too. I feel like we should do some questions about your book as well.
Yeah. All right. No. Give me your questions.
No, go ahead. Tell your story.
Well, I'm sitting at this faculty meeting with this individual,
mm-hmm.
and long story, this guy is the architect or the proponent of a lot of this total fucking insanity. And I said, listen, man, it's just you and me. Everybody had to leave for some reason. I'm like, listen,
you don't really believe this shit, do you?
Yeah, that's exactly what I said to him. Like, here we are, man. You don't actually believe that. I mean, you're a smart guy. You've got a PhD, multiple books, full professor. You honestly believe that only in the last 5 or maybe 10 years we've discovered the timeless, eternal truth about cultural appropriation, and it never before occurred to anybody. It's just all of a sudden kind of ex nihilo, boom, we got this. Like, do you actually believe that? And he looked at me with unshakable confidence and he said, yes, I do.
Wow.
And I wrote about that in an article for the Philosopher's Magazine, not that story, but I wrote about why it's a takeoff on Michael Shermer's Why People Believe Weird Things in The Believing Brain, and the book similarly named, and that people believe weird things, smart people in particular, because they're better at rationalizing, coming up with good reasons for bad conclusions. And when you get a bunch of people together, smart people like academicians, they're even better at that. And so the consequence of that is that you have an engine, really, that's fueling beliefs that are completely untethered to reality. And if you look at it like a recipe, you start calling out conservative voices and diverse voices, then those beliefs become normative. Then, everybody believes that, or we know it's to be true, because there's no there's no dialectic inherent in those beliefs and that worldview. It's just not valued.
We should mention to the audience too that might not know, you actually were a co-author in the grievance study audit. I like to call it the audit because grievance study hoax is like terrible framing for it.
Yeah.
Like, so you want to give the background on that?
Yeah, it failed the audit spectacularly.
Yeah.
So before I do that, why don't you ask me your other questions?
So, okay. Just so we put a button on it, the grievance study hoax, grievance study audit was you guys did a bunch of papers and submitted them to journals, which are
20 papers, 250,000 words in 10 months while co-writing a 77,000 word book. 7 papers in 7 years, you get tenure. We retired 7 of our papers. The Wall Street Journal busted us. We had 7 more about to go in or very close to being going in. So we published or get accepted to be published 7. We translated Hitler's Mein Kampf twice into various language.
You submitted, the important thing is you submitted to like social justice leaning scientific journals, and they accepted these papers, but they were just complete bogus nonsense. Yeah,
well, they were worse than nonsense. They put what Alan Sokol calls, morally fashionable ideas. They forwarded those with, sorry about the ducks there, with conclusions. So they were just agenda driven, and journalists, et cetera, were able to see what the editors did not. And, as Dawkins says, these people are pretentious charlatans, and this ideology is not only is it untethered to reality, it's divisive, it's rage-filled, it's seeped out of the university, et cetera. So we can go on. So we did the grievance studies things to expose bogus scholarship in the university. And I would urge people to read the papers themselves as opposed to what anybody else. Just read the papers. They're it's totally insane.
Yeah, it's awesome. Totally awesome. I'm a big fan. So back to the book. So I read the book. The first question I have is the pronouns issue is so dicey these days. How do you decide which pronouns to use in your thought experiment? And this is, so it's a new thing now. It used to be like it was just a standard to use a he pronoun when you did a thought experiment. But now the social justice thing is like you got to spread it between he and she. But it creates this weird dynamic where if you're using the wrong pronoun in a thought experiment where you're talking about like what a dummy he was or what a dummy she was, all of a sudden it can be considered sexist one way or the other. And I thought, wow, they just introduced this total landmine into books that was never there.
Yeah. So I remember years ago I read Charles Marty's What It Means to Be a Libertarian, and he wrote in that book, or maybe I listened to it, I don't remember, but he said he used the pronoun he because he's a he. But I've had a lot of people write to me, a lot of people, about thanking me that I put she in, or, and then you always have to be careful. Do you put she in when it's negative? Because then, you'll have 100 enraged people.
I know.
You misogynist. Why is the woman always the negative thing? Or why is the, so, we just alternated between them. I wish I could tell you we had some matrix or some calculus that we went through to figure that out, but we just pretty much alternated.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. So another question I have is, what do you have against Bigfoot? Why is it so important people believe actually correct information? Do you think the world would be a better place without Bigfoot believers?
Yeah, it's interesting. I let people in my science and pseudoscience class do a 5-minute presentation on any issue in there's like, I don't know, 400 issues or something, but one of those is Bigfoot. And I think it could be, I don't know this, but I think it could be because we live in the Pacific Northwest. That's a very popular one, so it comes up a lot. So one guy was giving his presentation, and the reason that he had for believing in Bigfoot was that he wanted, how did he frame it? That he wanted cred if he was right. And I thought that was a really interesting way of thinking. I never thought about that you could just kind of, in philosophy it's called doxastic volunteerism. It's from the Greek doxa, meaning to believe, that you could kind of, not capriciously, but you could just lend your belief because you want cred for having, like a hipster of belief or something, a first believer or whatever. But I guess I have my problem with Bigfoot is the same as any other belief. In my Easter Bunny talk, I said that these are kind of gateway beliefs, right? You start with silly, innocuous, harmful beliefs or less harmful beliefs, and then kind of provides cover for other beliefs. But I'm a big believer in having having a robust, rigorous epistemology upon which you can depend. And every time there's a crack in that epistemology, it's like a big dam that allows water to flood in. So you have to constantly be either patching the holes, or at some point you have to try to remake the dam. And if you do it when it's high tide, then you're in trouble, because then that's when emotional things prevent you, or communal things prevent you from revising those beliefs.
Yeah, this is funny too, because it actually plays into the doubt being a gift. Like, your book pitches doubt as a gift, and it's definitely a gift that I've been endowed with almost to the point of where it's difficult to even take a position. So I wonder sometimes, is doubt really a gift?
Well, I guess here's the question. It depends on how you define doubt. I've always looked at it as your rational mind knocking on your moral mind and saying, hey man, do you really believe this? Does this really make sense to you? And it's a way to, as Dan Dennett says in Breaking the Spell in chapter 7, we have this idea of belief and belief. So we believe things because we think that we're better people if we believe them. And that makes it very hard to dislodge a belief. But if you switch from thinking about it in terms of doubt to thinking about it in terms of epistemic humility, you just lower your confidence in your belief. That's all you're talking about when you're talking about doubt. It means you're recalibrating it downward.
Well, but there are cases though where we are better people for believing things. I mean, that's the evolutionary purpose of religion. Like, if you believe that there is some sort of cosmic justice, then you are more likely to behave accordingly. That's probably a good thing.
That's a dim view of reality, but it's probably a true one.
Yeah,
I believe that. Yeah, I believe that we're better off still. While I don't want to give a concession or admit, because that makes it like it's a bad way to frame it. But while I think that there are certainly elements of that are true, there is a deeper good to be had, and the deeper good is kind of what Socrates did with the Olympus. Although he didn't call it that. Socrates never called it the Socratic method, or Plato, who wrote about it. But that, teaching people how to reason and how to think and how to come up with rationally derivable beliefs and values the scientific method and value evidence, those things are better still. So that there's a hierarchy. One of those is the performative benefit of religion. But the deeper, and the deeper good for that is to teach people about how to clean up their own epistemology and come to rationally derivable true beliefs, because you and I both believe in moral facts. The other side of that is kind of a moral anarchy, where people don't have the structures of some traditional or the communal structures combined with the metaphysical rewards and punishments of some moral propositions. And it's kind of anarchy, and then they go around with a fucking chainsaw or sledgehammer, axe, something, and they become rapists and murderers and crazy stuff. But the on that hierarchy, the greatest good is teaching people how to develop reliable epistemologies. It's not just believing things because it hasn't had a belief efficacy.
Well, I don't know, and this is kind of the Sophie's choice of truth, because I don't necessarily know that factual truth will produce the greatest good. That's my question. That's my doubt.
You're right. It won't. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people valuing that, not the fact that it exists. And so it's all about what people value. Do people value belief revision? Do people value epistemic humility? Is reason your go-to? Are they trustful of reason? And so we have elements of our culture now that are anti-intellectual in the worst sense, and that, like, even the words, some of the words we use, like he is a man of conviction.
Mhm.
So when I hear he is a man of conviction, like a religious man, I think so that has a moral valence to it. But when I hear that, I think I translate that in my head as he is a man unwilling to revise his beliefs on the basis of sufficient evidence.
Mhm.
Right. So I'm talking about valuing the right things. And chief among those are attitudinal dispositions regarding reason, truth, and morality.
I have a couple questions. I'll ask them out of order because I think this is important. Like you do mention in the book, like this thing has a moral component or that thing has a moral component, but I'm not sure that you actually ever clearly define your terms, and it's probably just me because, like I told you before we started, I'm a huge Jonathan Haidt fan. I'm a huge fan of moral psychology. Like I am very much a social intuitionist. You kind of hint at being a social intuitionist in the book, but you never mention it specifically. So I'm not sure if you are a social intuitionist. But what makes something a moral component?
I sent chapter 7 to John, and he said it was great.
Okay, good.
I think that was his exact word, but so we checked it with him before it was published, just to make sure that because chapter 7 in particular is rooted in how to talk with an ideologue.
Right.
So it's a tricky word. I like to frame it or think about it in two ways. One, in terms of what it is to be an ideologue, because I think that's the chapter. Dude, it's pretty freaky to walk around and everybody's wearing face masks.
I know.
It's weird. It's like another.
You're not wearing one? Oh, I guess you're on an interview. It's kind of hard to.
Yeah, it's like the show Sliders, Well, I'm not walking around anybody either.
Yeah.
And you slid into a parallel world, and the parallel world is where everyone has this fucking pandemic. But anyway, so so I like to think about it in terms of belief revision and scales from the book. And so if somebody, what is your evidence? If someone says, what is your confidence on a scale from 1 to 10 in that belief? Really, 10 is a clear example of an ideologue. 9 is closing in on it. And so what it means to formulate a belief on the basis of evidence is that another belief could come in, another piece of evidence would come in that would cause you to revise the belief. And if you're not open to that or willing to do that, then your belief is informed on the basis of evidence, which is fine. But just admit that as you move forward in the conversation, right?
So you're saying moral components are beliefs that are based on identity or something else, not necessarily rational or reason.
Well, okay, so you and I both believe that there are moral facts. So that means that, well, it probably means that they're rationally derivable, a la John Rawls. Like you can do thought experiments to think about, you're behind a veil of ignorance and original position. So design a society as if your enemy were to assign you your social role, something like that. So you could, there are ways to derive, like with a cudgel. The scalpel is difficult. Some people have said we need super intelligent AI to use a scalpel, but to talk about moral questions. But I look at moral reasoning and critical thinking. The relationship between those is critical thinking is about moral questions is the same thing. It's just a very specific domain of thought about which you're applying literally identical tools that first have positive epistemological ambitions, right? Because you want more true beliefs, but it doesn't do you any good to have more true beliefs unless you have fewer false beliefs. So you've got to navigate that roadway. You can't just believe everything, and you can't believe nothing. So you have to be judicious in what you lend your belief to, but that's an attitude, right? That's a disposition that people have. So that's why in questions of, and I hope I'm answering your question, but in discussions about moral questions, among the most important things is that the person with whom you're speaking ideally would have an attitude of belief revision, even about moral questions. The problem is that it's difficult with some issues, like if it has identity issues, anything with an identity level salience is almost baked into it that people won't revise their beliefs. That's why the trans bathroom issue, the trans issue in general, is so difficult, because it's rooted in identity.
Yeah, it's rooted in tribalism.
Yeah, it's rooted in a lot of stuff, but those beliefs are very difficult to revise.
It'd be interesting to talk to you about objective morality, just because like my understanding of objective morality is usually very different than most people. You're coming at it from a philosophical point of view, but I'm coming more at it from an evolutionary psychology point of view. Like, I've bought into this idea that morality is a set of rules that binds people into a cooperative community. And that set of rules
and blinds, as Haidt says,
yeah,
right?
morality binds and blinds. Exactly. It's Jonathan Haidt all the way. So that set of rules, like, we can take a moral community that is competing on an evolutionary basis against another moral community. And if one moral community is out competing the other moral community in, resources or reproductive success, we could say that whatever list of rules they're using to bind that community together is probably better than another one. I actually did a debate with Kent Hovind on why evolution can prove slavery is immoral, because I'm using this system of, a list of rules. It's a very scientific way of looking at morality.
Yeah, I'm glad you used better and not true. So you were channeling your inner Peterson there. And as long as you don't say the word true, you and I are cool. Like, I don't have any problem with that, as we've talked about. The problem is, and you're not doing this, so I have no problem with it at all, is when people start claiming that these things are true. It's like the type 1.
I agree.
Type 2. Yeah. So as long as you're not claiming that they're true, but that they're efficacious somehow, either on a micro or macro level, then that's just an empirical question, right? Then you can look. It's hard to set up a control group for that, obviously, but you could do it to a certain extent, like Palestinian suicide bombers. As far as I know, I'm not an expert in this, but only Muslim Palestinians are suicide bombers. There are literally no Christians, as far as I know. And so you keep all the variables the same when you do science, and you change only one: culture, time, religion, history, community structure, geographical location, etc. But those are empirical questions that, while difficult to test, could certainly be. You could use evidence to make reasonable inferences about that. But you're not saying that they're true.
Right.
You're saying that they're somehow better, and by better, I assume you mean either there's some metric that you're doing that enables individuals in society to not suffer, or the
metric that you're always forced back to is utilitarianism, like the most good for the largest number of people. I don't necessarily know a way around that.
Here's my question to you. So if you, well, I'll let you finish your question. Go ahead.
Well, no, I don't know if you're a utilitarian, but I think like if you're judging that, like, obviously you said, and I agree, like, we can't ever do this experiment. But if you had Society A with a list of moral rules and Society B with a list of moral rules, and Society B was growing faster and the people were more prosperous in a utilitarian kind of way, and the other society was shrinking or staying the same, or people were suffering, but they were growing, but everyone was suffering, then you could make the comparison objectively.
Yeah. So which lends itself, segues into my question. So I don't know if you bought my hierarchy, but so how likely do you think it is? Or do you think it's possible? Let's say that there's a society who has some benign version of Christianity. Nobody's a literalist. No one believes in actual talking snake, but they take the positive parts, like, love your neighbor and stuff like that, and whatever the positive parts. I don't think we need to delve in too many details, but they believe those things out of tradition. Nobody really believes it because they're rationally derivable. They believe it because it seems to have worked very well in society, and whatever apologists they do have in the society can just point to the works. They're kind of like Catholics as opposed to Calvinists. So let me ask you a question. Let's say that's the society. what would you say about somebody who went into that society and started telling people, look, this is just not true. It might be accidentally true, and it probably is, almost definitely is better to be kind than it is to be vicious to somebody or unkind or cruel to somebody, but not for the reasons you think. Do you think, what would you term that person? A rebel rouser, a gadfly, somebody who fuels positive apologetics on the other side, a bad person, a good person?
Well, it obviously depends upon what team you're on, but I believe, that person, I believe like our society is the best structured because we have these different communities peacefully cohabitating. Like, I think that we allow a certain atheist population among us. We tolerate that atheist population. I think is actually good for society. Like it ends up in moving forward the scientific method. But okay. I question that everyone can be those atheist scientist types.
So I guess that's a roundabout answer to my question, because I was going to say I think that I thought you were going. I was wondering what you were going to say. I wasn't sure about what we would call that person. See, I would say that person is good.
Yeah, I think so too. They're necessary.
Yeah, and I think that things like that cause people to reflect more deeply on their beliefs. And I guess I do have a hope, a deep hope, not a fanciful hope, but a deep hope that, as Aristotle says, people want to know, people want to believe true things. And so I think we're far better off attempting to construct societies that value certain things, and kindness is absolutely a moral value, but I think kindness is a moral value because we can kind of sit down and figure out why it's a good thing, as opposed to fear of eternity or our religious leaders telling that us. And I think that we're better as a society if we cast off religious superstitions or religious moral values, even if those religious moral values are, to use your word, better. Now, of course, the risk in doing that is that we won't succeed in our ambition. In the Republic, Plato talks about the myth of the metals for governing structure. Like, the leaders have gold and the next person has this in their blood. I think lying to people is almost always a bad thing. But I guess that's where our difference comes. I think it's incumbent upon us to try to help people value certain things. And even if valuing certain or having dispositions, even if that comes at the price of temporary societal instability, like increased crime rates or drug overdoses or what have you.
Really? So my question, I guess, is, so you believe that a society that was close to 100% atheist, it would outcompete a society that was like 80% religious and 20% atheist?
No, I do not believe that for 1 second.
Okay.
I mean, look at social justice warriors. Look at the whole
yeah, exactly.
academe and everybody in their orbit. These people are totally deranged.
They'd pick up a different religion, and it would be an untested religion that they're basically testing on the fly.
We're about to see what happens when these people seize power. You think things are bad under Christianity. Just wait until these people get in. So no, I don't believe that, but I believe that I think everybody would be better off, literally everybody, if we encouraged and taught people how to have rigorous epistemologies. If we taught people to shape up and have more robust ways of coming to knowledge. I think that if we were to do that, we would ultimately, maybe not in the short term because there would be a disruption, but we would ultimately have, in a utilitarian and a deontological context, better societies that flourish, societies in which people can, all the rational values, which I'm completely convinced at this point, these are liberalism and enlightenment values, standing on your own 2 feet, science, etc. It's
an interesting thing, and I'm sorry if I'm misquoting your book, or it's a guide to creating atheists. Is that it?
A manual for
creating atheists. Okay. There seems to be an implication in that you would believe in a society that was better, that was 100% atheist. Like I think of it as like a manual for creating doctors no one would have a problem with, but we don't necessarily need 100% of people being doctors. So I do believe
think about it this way. Instead of let's look at a manual for creating doctors.
Mm-hmm.
Doctors is a conclusion that one comes to when one values the application of the scientific method toward physical phenomena with human bodies, right? If it's or veterinarians, if it's animals or something. But the in this sense, it's if everybody used a reliable epistemology, then by definition, they could rely upon the conclusions that they derived as a result of that epistemology. And I argued it very explicitly in the book that one of those conclusions would be atheism. And it's a mistake to think about it in terms of atheism, but what we should be thinking about it is in terms of epistemology. Right. And how do we help people develop epistemologies that are more likely to lead them to truth and less likely to lead them to believe, for example, that Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse. Right? Even if the consequences or the byproduct of having that belief is that it keeps people's primitive impulses in check, so they don't discharge those impulses by gang raping people.
Mm-hmm. You would rather have 100% of society believe factually true things. That would be a best case scenario for you.
Believe as opposed to
believing in Bigfoot or the Loch Ness monster or any of the things that we've.
So I'll answer your question. I think it's not how I'd frame it, and it lends itself to kind of unfairness.
Okay.
But, yeah. So I mean, I would frame it. I would much rather have a society that had an epistemology that was governed by calibrating one's beliefs to the evidence and justification they have for those beliefs, and not extending their confidence beyond the warrant of the evidence. So that's much different way. It's more linguistically cumbersome, but it's much more maybe technical and fine-tuned, if you will, to kind of use a pun on fine-tuning, than just looking at it in terms of everyone believing facts. Believing facts doesn't really do you any good. You have to value those facts.
Right. Well, I'm a huge proponent of the scientific ethos. Like I am. I mean, we're both in the same tribe in that sense. The only question that I have is, can 100% of people value that scientific ethos? And I don't necessarily think that they can. And I mean, your book largely focuses on dealing with things like confirmation bias and, changing people's minds, trying to
not changing people's minds, giving them the tools to change it themselves, to giving them the gift of doubt. And it's also, it's a suite of, fallacies. It's like desirability bias. I mean, look at the situation we're in now, which people desire certain things to be true. That just doesn't make it true.
True. Yeah.
And so that's, the whole Bigfoot problem again. It's like anytime all of those cracks in the epistemological dam, you just can't let those things, you just can't let in. You have to have really a kind of both self-forgiveness, but also a kind of really you have to be tough on yourself when it comes to what you believe, why, and what your evidence is for that. And you need to be merciless with continuing to go back and ask yourself and be honest with yourself, right? That's another disposition that's key. You really have to be honest with yourself about why you believe something. And is it that you desire it to be true? So I think we should be teaching on a macro level people things like that, helping them to value those things. And I do think, and maybe you can ask me my evidence for this, I do think we would be better off as a society, even if that meant that there's a certain percent. Are we going to get 100%? Probably not, but I don't really know. Right? Even if you look at the hair studies and such, it says 1% of the people are psychopaths. Okay, so you write off those 1%. They're not going to be. There's nothing you can do about those people anyway. But what about everybody else? I mean, you could look at the Scandinavia as an example. They've largely eschewed religious beliefs, but they have, they believe in people of Iceland have all these beliefs in pixies and spirits and all that stuff. Those are benign beliefs that I don't think they govern moral behavior, but I'm not familiar with those traditions enough to say that definitively. I think that even in those cases, like the Bigfoot thing, we would be better off valuing at a core root for who we are as humans and what it means to us if we did our very, very best with honesty and sincerity to correlate our beliefs as closely as possible, or to fine tune our beliefs with the evidence that we have for those beliefs. Anytime we stray from that, even if it's accidentally true, like some of the beliefs in Christianity, I think that you're just asking for a world of trouble.
I'm constantly wondering what the world of trouble is, because I just feel like evolution has seized on these untrue beliefs that people believe and weeded out the ones that you would really get into a world of trouble if they believed, and kind of promoted the ones that are pro-social and good for people's health. Have you read Stephen Asma's book, Why We Need Religion? Yeah. I'm curious.
Yeah. Hold on one second, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I'm going to violate the very thing that I asked you not to do. I'm going to do it myself.
What are you going to do?
So I asked you when you emailed me, I said, look, I'll talk about anything, but I don't want to talk about the virus, and I don't want to talk about Trump. I'm gonna violate that, and I'm gonna take responsibility for that. Let's go back to the.
Oh no, you're bringing Trump in.
No, I'm not. I know that's the other.
Oh no, Peter, don't do it.
We don't talk about two things. Now I'm going to talk about one of those things. So it really is just the best example. That's why I'm going to do it. And then I'm not going to talk about.
Okay, go ahead.
Violating my own rule. So look at this lunatic in Kentucky, or no, the one in Florida. All these pastors, or what's happening in Iran. These people licking the doors right now. I tweeted out about that. So that's just a great example. You said to me, I don't know what the trouble is. Okay, well, that's the trouble, right? Because now you have, so there's an inability, a failure of people to acknowledge that what other people believe matters. And that's a paradigmatic example of the fact that it matters. These people are licking doors. And in fact, if you look, and that's the other thing, it's not just like it's in Iran, right? It's not like some lunatic licks a door in Iran. No, some lunatic ate a bat in China. Not even a lunatic. A guy ate a bat in China with different gustatory preferences or whatever. And
I heard a little bit. You came back in a little bit. That's okay.
Sorry about that. Sorry, my daughter called and that threw me off of the call.
That's okay.
Sorry about that. No, so some guy eats a bat in good different gustatory preferences or what have you in China. And look at the fucking mess we're in right now. So, in this case, you asked very specifically. You said, "Well, what kind of trouble are we talking about?" Well, I think that's a paradigmatic example of what kind of trouble we're talking about.
Right.
Because not only do your beliefs matter to you, but they matter to everybody else.
From a purely scientific perspective, though. You have to admit that evolution works on the on average thing. Like if religion produces 49% catastrophe and 51% bliss, then evolution is going to seize on that. Yes. And it's difficult for me to argue that evolution is wrong. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. And one of the differences between humans and cheetahs have been running the same speed for thousands of years, but we are capable of change. We're capable of improvement. We've certainly seen moral improvement in Steven Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature and Michael Shermer's The Moral Arc. And I'm advocating, and I think that this is our fundamental difference between us, that even if we accept by fiat that every single thing you said was true, even in your hypotheticals, that is still not a reason to try to instill certain values in people about willingness to revise their belief, doxastic openness, being trustful of reason.
I agree.
Given that would have a potential to disrupt benign religions, even if those benign religions have beneficial utilitarian consequences.
I don't think that you can get rid of religion, and I think one of the reasons is that people don't change their minds. And often I wonder, and this is that whole I'm just a creature of doubt. Like I am very much that a creature of the scientific ethos. Would society, my question I guess to you is, would society be more stable or less stable if everyone was able to change their minds easily and change their minds often?
I guess it would be what they change their minds easily and often about.
Yeah. Well,
again, we're talking if we see it in moral facts, and again, I think it really does come back to the substitution hypothesis, and whether you think that people just have an inherent propensity to believe irrational or superstitious nonsense. I have to go in my house because I have to make dinner. So
no, we've been talking for about an hour. We can wrap it up. Definitely. You're cutting out. Okay, you're getting calls from your kids. So, but this has been a fascinating conversation. I hope I hope you feel the same. So.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. What have you taken out of it?
I've watched your stuff for a long period of time, so I'm very curious about your take on a lot of these ideas. I don't know that you've ever addressed any of like metaphorical truth in any of your interviews or any of that stuff. So
no one's ever asked me.
Yeah. Which is why
you're the first person.
That's why
person who's asked me.
That's why I want to talk to you, because this is kind of a complicated thing, and I mean, I see very much in a Jordan Peterson way that we should like not throw the baby out with the bathwater, and that we should use the scientific method to discern what the baby is. And I feel like there are a lot of atheists, and not really atheists, there are a lot of anti-theists who are just reflexively anti-religious out there that have the potential to hurt the cause, the scientific cause. So that's my thing.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, maybe we can continue at another point. Because I would be willing to, if you want to, revisit some of these ideas. I think we touched on some of the important things, but obviously can be resolved quite complicated philosophical and societal, social, political, even economic issues.
Yeah, no, I would, if you want to talk again, I'm more than happy to talk to you. So I'll publish this on my channel. You can kind of gauge the reaction. You can read the comments and whatever. I'm a friend of, you're friends with Reed Nice Wonder. I've
super good dude.
Yeah, I love that guy. So, I mean, we're all talking about the same ideas, and kind of, we're looking for truth. We're all looking for truth. So. All right, well,
I appreciate having me on, man. Thank you.
Yeah, take care, man. Good luck, and I'll talk to you soon. Stay safe.
All right, man. Later, bro.